The clock on my laptop read 11:47 p.m. when I finally closed the last ticket of the night. Outside, the November rain was doing what November rain does in a small town, hitting the gutters hard enough that you could hear it from every room in the house. I sat back in my chair, rubbed my eyes, and listened. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets when you've been staring at code for 6 hours straight and your brain starts playing tricks on you. My name is Marcus. I'm a network security engineer. I work from home, which means I'm always home, which my wife, I'll call her Dana, used to say was both a blessing and a curse. More curse than blessing, as it turned out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to tell you about the night I found out. Not because I enjoy reliving it, but because I think some of you need to hear how these things actually unfold. Not in some dramatic movie moment where everything is loud and obvious. They unfold quietly. In the spaces between things. In a borrowed phone and a Google Maps search that was never meant for my eyes. My brother's name is Derek. He's 3 years older than me, 41 at the time this happened. He sold commercial real estate and was, by every external measure, the kind of man people admire without examining too closely. Good-looking in that easy, effortless way. Confident. The kind of guy who remembers everyone's drink order and makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room. Growing up, I wanted to be like him. I spent most of my 30s realizing I'd been measuring myself against a man who didn't exist. Dana and Derek had known each other since before Dana and I started dating. They'd met at a party, shook hands, exchanged the usual pleasantries. When Dana and I got serious, she said she liked Derek, said he was fun. I never thought anything of it. Why would I? The night everything changed started with something so ordinary, it almost feels embarrassing to describe. Dana and I had been talking for months about buying a house. We'd been renting a 2-bedroom in Claremont for 4 years, and the landlord had just notified us the rent was going up in March. We'd been saving. We had an appointment with a mortgage broker for the following Monday. The previous weekend, we'd gone to look at a place on Birchwood Drive. 3 bedrooms, a garage, a yard with an actual oak tree in it. Dana had stood under that tree and said, "This is it, Marcus. This is the one." I believed her. I put in the offer the next morning. That Saturday afternoon, Derek came over. He said he was in the neighborhood. He did that sometimes, showed up without calling, which I'd always found slightly irritating, but never said anything about because he was my brother and that's what you do. You absorb the small irritations because the relationship is worth more than the inconvenience. We sat on the back porch. Dana brought out beers. The 3 of us talked about the house on Birchwood, about the mortgage, about whether the inspection would come back clean. Derek said he knew a good inspector. Derek always knew somebody. Around 5 o'clock, Dana went inside to start dinner. Derek and I talked for another 20 minutes. Then he said he had to go. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, then made a face. "My battery's almost dead," he said. "Can I use yours to check directions? My car GPS is acting up." I handed him my phone without thinking. He pulled up Google Maps, typed something in. I wasn't watching. I was looking at the yard, thinking about whether we could put a deck back there after we moved. He handed my phone back, said goodbye, and left. I went inside. Dana was at the stove. I set my phone on the counter, washed my hands, started setting the table. It was maybe 10 minutes later when I picked up my phone to check the time and saw that Google Maps was still open. The destination Derek had typed wasn't an address I recognized. It was a name. A restaurant, about 12 miles away. But that wasn't what stopped me. What stopped me was the search history below it. Because when you use someone else's phone for Google Maps, you don't always think about what you're leaving behind. And what Derek had left behind was a history that included 3 searches back, an address I knew very well. It was the address of a hotel 6 blocks from our apartment, searched 11 days earlier, from my phone. Except I hadn't searched it. I hadn't been to that hotel. I hadn't had any reason to search for it. Dana had my phone 11 days ago. I remembered it clearly because her phone had died on our way to her friend's birthday dinner, and she'd used mine to call ahead and say we'd be late. She'd had my phone for about 40 minutes that evening. I stood in the kitchen and looked at that search. Then I looked at Dana's back. She was stirring something on the stove, humming quietly to herself, completely at ease. I put my phone in my pocket and finished setting the table. Dinner was quiet, but not unusually so. Dana talked about the oak tree again. She said she'd already looked up landscapers in the area. She showed me photos of outdoor furniture she liked. I listened and nodded and said things like, "That looks good," and "Yeah, that could work." I heard every word she said and I absorbed none of it. That night, after Dana fell asleep, I sat in my office in the dark and thought very carefully about what I was going to do next. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a man who acts on impulse. I've worked in security long enough to know that the worst mistakes happen when people react before they have complete information. You don't patch a vulnerability before you fully map the system. You don't make a move before you know what you're actually dealing with. So I didn't confront Dana that night. I didn't call Derek. I didn't do anything that would signal that I knew something was wrong. Instead, I started paying attention. What I noticed over the next 2 weeks would have been invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Dana's phone face down on the table. She'd always kept its screen up before. A lunch with a girlfriend from work on a Tuesday when she normally worked through lunch. Derek texting me less than usual, which I'd have dismissed as nothing 6 months ago. A new bottle of perfume in the bathroom cabinet that I didn't recognize, still in the box, pushed behind other things. None of these things were proof of anything. I knew that. But they were a pattern, and patterns are what I do. After 2 weeks, I made an appointment with a private investigator, a woman named Carol who had the most unremarkable office I've ever been in. Beige walls, a folding table, 2 chairs, and the sharpest eyes I've ever looked into. I told her what I had. She listened without expression. When I finished, she said, "Give me 10 days. She gave me results in 7. I'm not going to describe the photographs in detail. I don't think that serves anyone. What I will tell you is that Carol confirmed what I already suspected, documented it with enough evidence to be irrefutable, and presented it to me on a Thursday afternoon in that beige office while I sat very still and felt something inside me rearrange itself permanently. The hotel 6 blocks from our apartment. Twice in the past 3 weeks. Derek's car in the parking lot. Both times on afternoons when I was in back-to-back calls. There it was. I thanked Carol, paid her invoice in full, and drove home. I did not speed. I stopped at every light. I parked in our usual spot, walked upstairs, and started making a list. Here is something I've learned about betrayal. The first wave of emotion is not the dangerous one. The dangerous one comes later, quieter, when you've had time to think. The first wave is loud and it moves through you fast. It's the second one, the cold, clear, purposeful one, that you have to manage carefully. That weekend, my father called. My father's name is Robert, and he is, at 67, still the most important opinion in any room he enters. He was a contractor for 30 years. He built things with his hands and believed in directness and responsibility and the kind of loyalty that doesn't require explanation. I had respected him my entire life. He called to ask about the house on Birchwood. Said Derek had mentioned we were close to signing. Said he was proud of us, that it was a good step. We talked for a few minutes about the inspection timeline. Then he said, "You know, Marcus, Derek mentioned he's been going through some things lately. You should check in on him." I said I would. I almost left it there. I almost said goodbye and hung up and continued with my plan. But something in the way he said it, something practiced, something that sounded like it had been prepared, made me stop. "What kind of things?" I asked. There was a pause. Short but real. Just, he's been stressed. Work stuff. You know how he gets. I said I did. We said goodbye. I sat with that conversation for a long time afterward. 3 days later, I called my father back. I told him I needed to talk to him about something. I drove to his house on a Sunday morning, sat across from him at his kitchen table, and showed him what Carol had given me. He looked at the photographs for a long time. His face didn't change much. When he finally looked up, he said, "How long have you known?" And I understood then that he was not surprised. I asked him directly. I asked him how long he had known. He looked out the window. He said Derek had told him a few weeks ago. Said he'd asked my father not to say anything. Said it was complicated. Said Dana was unhappy and Derek was trying to figure out how to end it cleanly before anyone got hurt. "Before anyone got hurt," I repeated. My father looked back at me. He said, "I know how this sounds." I told him it sounded like he'd chosen his older son over his younger one. I told him it sounded like he'd let me sit across from Dana at dinner every night for weeks, planning a life with her. signing mortgage papers in my head, while he knew what was happening. He didn't argue at that. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known what to do. He said family was complicated. I told him I agreed. I told him family was very complicated. Then I left. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are asking the same question the situation demands. Why did they do it? Why does anyone do it? I've thought about this longer than I'd like to admit, and I don't have a clean answer. What I can tell you is that when I eventually, months later, had a brief, final conversation with Dana, she told me she hadn't been happy for a long time. That she'd felt like she was living with a roommate who was always working. That she'd felt invisible. I heard her say that. I sat with it. I didn't dismiss it. I also didn't think it justified what she did. You don't respond to feeling invisible by becoming someone who actively deceives. You have a conversation. You go to counseling. You say, out loud, to the person you married, I'm not happy and I don't know how to fix it. That's the hardest conversation in the world to have. It's also the only honest one. She didn't have that conversation with me. She had a different kind of conversation with my brother in a hotel 6 blocks from our apartment, and my father knew about it. That was the part that took the longest to process. The week after I visited my father, I had 3 conversations that mattered. The first was with a divorce attorney named Patricia, who had been recommended by a colleague and who, in our first meeting, proved to be exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when the ground has shifted under your feet. Calm, precise, and completely unsentimental. I laid out the situation. She asked good questions. By the end of the meeting, I understood exactly where I stood legally and what my options were. The second conversation was with the mortgage broker. I called and explained that due to a change in personal circumstances, I needed to pause the process on the Birchwood property. He was professional about it. The earnest money situation was complicated. There were clauses, contingencies, negotiations. I'll spare you the details. What matters is that with Patricia's help, I recovered most of what I'd put in. Not all of it, but most. The third conversation was with Dana. I did not yell. I want to be clear about that. I had made a decision, somewhere in those quiet nights after Carol's envelope arrived, that I was not going to be loud about this. Loud is what people expect. Loud is what people remember for the wrong reasons. I wanted to be remembered for the wrong reasons. I wanted to be remembered, if I was remembered at all, for being clear. I sat Dana down on a Tuesday evening. I put Carol's documentation on the table between us. I watched her face go through several things in the space of about 4 seconds: confusion, then recognition, then something that looked almost like relief, which told me more than anything else could have. I told her I knew. I told her I knew about the hotel. I told her I knew it was Derek. I told her I knew it had been going on for at least a month based on the documentation, though I suspected longer. She started to say something. I held up my hand. Not unkindly, just firmly. I told her I'd already spoken to a divorce attorney. I told her the process was going to be civil and straightforward and that I had every intention of conducting myself with dignity, and I expected the same from her. I told her I was not interested in a conversation about why, not that night and possibly not ever, but that I was willing to revisit that at some later point if it would help her. Then I said the thing I'd been thinking about for 2 weeks. I said, I want you to know that I'm not angry at you in the way you might expect. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Anger burns out. Disappointment is something you carry. I'll carry this for a long time. But I'm going to be fine. And I want you to think about whether you will be. She cried. I handed her a box of tissues and went to make myself a cup of coffee. The divorce took 7 months. It was not pleasant, but it was not the disaster it could have been. Dana did not contest the major points. We had no children. The assets were largely separable. Patricia was excellent. Derek called me once, about 3 weeks after I'd told Dana. He called from a number I didn't recognize. He must have known I wouldn't pick up if I saw his name. I picked up anyway. I listened to him for about 90 seconds. He said he hadn't meant for it to happen. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped we could eventually get past it. I told him I wished him well. I told him I meant that sincerely. I told him I also had no interest in maintaining a relationship with someone who had demonstrated, clearly and repeatedly, that my trust meant nothing to him. I told him that wasn't anger speaking. It was just accounting. You add up what someone is over time, and you arrive at a number. His number was what it was. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Dad thinks." I told him I wasn't interested in what Dad thought. Then I hung up. My father and I are spoken twice in the 14 months since all of this happened. Once at Christmas, because my mother asked me to come, and I came for her. Once on his birthday, because I called, because whatever else is true, he is still my father and I am still his son. And those facts do not dissolve just because things became complicated. Both conversations were short, cordial. We talked about nothing that mattered. I think we both understood that something had shifted and that shifting it back was not a project either of us knew how to start. I bought a different house. Not on Birchwood Drive. A smaller place, a one-bedroom with a good office and a yard I don't have to share with anyone. In a neighborhood I chose entirely for myself. I painted the kitchen a color Dana would have hated. I got a dog, a 7-year-old rescue greyhound named Fletcher, who sleeps on the couch and asks very little of me and gives back exactly what he has to give. I work the same hours. I'm still in network security. I still close tickets at 11:47 at night sometimes, and I still sit back in my chair afterward and listen to the house. The difference is that now, when the house is quiet, it's quiet the right way. It's quiet because I chose what's in it. Because everything here, every piece of furniture, every photograph, every Saturday morning routine, is something I built deliberately after the rubble. There's a thing people say about betrayal, that it changes you. I think that's both true and slightly misleading. It doesn't change you the way damage changes a structure, where something is now weaker than it was. At least it doesn't have to. What it actually does, if you're careful and you're patient and you don't let the loud wave be the one that makes your decisions, what it does is clarify. It removes the things that were never load-bearing to begin with. I thought my brother was load-bearing. He wasn't. I thought my father's judgment was something I could trust without reservation. It isn't. I thought the house on Birchwood Drive was the future. It was just a house. Fletcher is asleep on the couch right now. The rain stopped an hour ago. The yard outside my window is exactly the right size for one person and one greyhound, and I know every corner of it, and nothing in it was chosen by committee. That's enough. For now, that's exactly enough.